do appreciate very much so the work, the uncomfortable work into the nuanced spaces between what we think is right and what end up being the result. And accepting and creating spaces where it is okay to have made a mistake. One of the things I pick up on, when I'm having this conversation is like specifically saying, help me understand. Because that invites somebody to expand upon their own knowledge and without the accusation of like, you got it wrong the first time. And really in this space where like maybe the goal is to put heads together and come up with an idea that is jointly created, is something that I think needs to be brought back. And I think it's incredible that you're doing that in the educational world. Like you said, we're already at a 10. And as much as I would love to see the adult population, no matter where they are in their life, kind of have this renaissance of curiosity, that it's going to have to really be the focus on young children because they are the future. And as much as we heard that as kids, it's like, okay, what does that mean again? Where can we not only teach kids to be more curious, but also prepare them for when they might be wrong or they might have something that needs to be reinvestigated. I think curiosity also has a lot to do with something that we have stolen from ourselves, and that is the ability to take the capacity to take the responsibility for our own personal growth. The self-help, that is again like a whole cultural phenomenon that feeds people what they think they should be doing rather than the time it takes to sit down, sometimes maybe in isolation, sometimes maybe with friends or the community, and think critically about like, where does this not only benefit me and where I want to be as a person, because that is still important to most of us. I mean, we're individually mindset based. That's probably going to take decades to, backtrack on. But it creates that safe space that I think, again, children are going to be so much more impressioned by and willing to find, because it feeds into that muscle. It allows them to be, to question things that benefit them, but also others. And honestly, as I talk about this, I see where it could also piece and bring people together on a small scale, maybe on a large scale, where everyone's okay with, not assuming or feeling like they're being accused of being wrong, because we have a really bad habit of associating the knowledge we have and the beliefs we share with who we are as a person. Do you think that adults, no matter what age, if we're considering adults at 18, which, that's another podcast in and of itself, can like achieve that damn word, can reintegrate some degree of curiosity into their lives in the way that they relate to other people?
Absolutely. And if I may, Casey, I want to backtrack before I answer that, delve more into it, to like what you're talking about how change happens through and how we can use curiosity. So I just want to give a quick example. So in my advocacy work, I think people underestimate the power of just educating one another and as a way of influencing and advancing eventual policies to improve things. So I think we often jump to, we need to, get this policy win. We need to get this funding now. And there needs to be a sense of urgency with many things, certainly when it comes to, human rights and needs and discrimination and whenever there's big injustices happening. But I think that we also sometimes overlook the power of educating. So I was listening to a podcast, and I don't recall his name. I'm going to look it up, though. He has been a long time gay rights activist and leader in the movement. And someone asked him in the podcast, why do you think, in contrast to other human rights movements across time, like take the women's rights movement, which took centuries for us to get the vote, right? Why has the gay rights movement been able to move so quickly? And one of his responses was, he said, well, I know personally, whenever I'm invited to speak somewhere, even if I know I'm going into a space where people actively oppose gay rights, or that is their stance, I will always take the opportunity to go and meet with people and speak with them, because I want to share my side of the story, my perspective, and maybe I can, open their minds a little bit, or give them more information or educate them. So I think it's like, it is, going back to your word responsibility, I think it's an opportunity and a responsibility for each of us to really engage with people who are different than us, and when you lead with curiosity, it doesn't have to be this oppositional thing. It can be, hey, this is who I am. This is my experience. Like you were just telling us, this is how it shaped me, and I want to tell you about it. And there's actually research around, there's this strategy called deep canvassing, which is a technique to not just knock on someone's doors and leave a flyer, or have your talking points and say, you should vote for so-and-so because of so-and-so, but to more have a 30-minute plus conversation with voters. And yes, it may not be as efficient, and you may not be guaranteed that they're going to vote for your candidate, but there's research that it does shift people's opinion on issues, and that it has a greater impact long-term on building that education and consensus versus, those drive-by approaches. So now that I shared that, your original question was, can adults basically become curious again, and can they do that? I think absolutely. And I think like the first step with anything is just like awareness, and so in my TEDx talk, I outline these steps, and the first one is awaken. And I use that word very intentionally because it does have spiritual connotations to it, and it's intended to, and philosophical, because I think that what happens by the time we're adults is, and you alluded to this earlier, our brains are like little computers. They like to calculate things really quickly and put things in categories and label them to just be more efficient for our thinking. But the downside of that is that we make assumptions, we categorize people and things. And so we actually have to examine and challenge our own mindsets and thinking, and to say, oh, I just judged this person, or I just assumed that, but is that really true? Right. So to be aware of our thoughts, and equally to be aware of our emotions. I was reading that she's a psychologist she was the one who came up with the 7 stages of grief. And I think she was maybe from Sweden or Denmark. But she basically said that there's 2 root or core emotions from which all other emotions stem from. And that is fear and love. And you can only be in one at one point. You can't be in both. And the more I thought about it, curiosity, it comes from a place of love, right? So when we're in fear, we can't see straight. We make assumptions. We're protecting ourselves. Love, a place from love, is open-mindedness. So to be aware of not only our thoughts, but our emotions, are we coming from a place of fear or a place of love? And if we can replace our fear with curiosity, lean into the unknown and ask questions, how much better can our lives be? And so I think that first step is awaken, kind of just being aware of our thoughts and emotions that hold us back in that place of fear. Try to liberate ourselves from that fear, and that it's not easy, but it takes practice, and we all that's a lifelong process for us all to work on. And then the next step is really just explore your curiosity. And if you don't know what you're curious about, there's never been a time in history where we have more to pursue our curiosity, but to do it in a way where, ask a friend, like, what do I talk about a lot? Or like, help me figure out, what do you think I'd be interested in? If you're really in a place where you've gotten to that point where you just feel so stuck that you don't even know what you're interested in, ask a friend, read a book, go explore a museum or a new place, and just be open to what you observe, and then just pursue it by learning more about it. And it'll be contagious from there. And then the other steps I talk about after that is strengthen. So going back to the analogy of curiosity as a muscle. So I think it's both a mindset and a muscle. The mindset being it's always within us, and we want to approach life with that mindset of curiosity, but a muscle in terms of we can strengthen it. So the things I mentioned in the TEDx talk are techniques like asking a lot of questions, active listening, which is hard to do, but it will really improve our relationships, and it will help us understand people in a deeper way. In other languages, there's actually two different words for the word to know, for the term to know. So in French, it's savoir and connaître. And savoir is kind of like the surface level factual know, and connaître is the deeper level, like if, you're to say to your good friend, I know you, I don't just know your name or when you were born, I know you. And so to get to that deeper knowing through active listening, and then it's seeking out diverse perspectives and try new things. And like you said, getting outside your comfort zone. And then the last step I talk about is, to really change the world we live in, we can't just keep our curiosity to ourselves. We need to share it with others to help them enrich their own curiosity. So how can you be that spark for someone else? Can you encourage them? Can you invite them to, a field trip for adults, right? Or whatever you guys are both curious about or you think they are, invite them on that journey, because curiosity is meant to be shared in that way. So I know that was a long answer, but I wanted to outline some of those steps as well.
No, that's absolutely fine. And these are the kind of, nuanced answers that you're giving that touch on so many levels. And then, if you're curious, like listen to our podcast, shameless plug, because there is always something that can hook somebody's curiosity or interest, or maybe there's something that they disagree on. And then, it's an invitation to be like, okay, what more about this do you want to know? And what kind of impact would it have on who you are as a person? In light regard, to explore that. The author that you were talking about, her name was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she wrote that in like the 1960s. And I think the awakeness part was a lot more acceptable in the culture that we had in those moments. And so those stages of grief were like expanded upon. But I love that you bring that up, because it's not just necessarily like the stages of grief that we can like take away from that, but like the comparison of fear and love. And we live in a world where we are fear-monged into almost everything. The news is really good at that.
Yep.
I think what drives me mad when I do watch the news are like the advertisements for even news stations. All the pictures and videos they use are just things that like that make you uncomfortable, that you like can fear.
Right.
How we get away from that, I'm not really sure. I think that would take a spiritual revolution, which again is another podcast. And to that regard, there are some things that people, because of their situations, just don't have time to explore. With privilege comes the time and space to sit there and think outside of the box. And that is, it's crap. That shouldn't be the situation. However it is. And someone that came to mind as you were speaking about Elizabeth, and then the types of ways that we can get curious, is the documentarian, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right, Daya Khan. She's a Muslim woman from Norway, and she kind of grew up in a very culturally sound place where her parents were always having these philosophical discussions with their friends. And her dad was very adamant about, like, you might not see change now, but eventually it will come, because there will always be people that are pressing for the change that is necessary in correcting these, injustices. She has also interviewed leaders in the white right, so extreme leaders that have their strong opinions, not with the sense of hoping to like change them, but just purely in the regard of trying to understand why people with those kind of ideals come to those conclusions. And a lot of them is they had a bad experience, or it was a misguided. Actually, no, let's just backtrack. It was a bad experience. There was trust placed on another party, that trust was, betrayed. And these ideas, whether it's the white right or other extremist groups, where they are convinced that in order to retain that sense of autonomy, they have to have these ideas of opposition that really show who they are. When the truth is, like I said, like there is no reflection in your beliefs on who you are as a soul, as a person. But she's done an incredible job. She's also interviewed extremists in the Middle East, again, who have a lot of ideas about how women should be in their roles. And I'll include her interview with Russell Brand in the description. But it's just profound, and it's very like uplifting that there are still people that have influence in the world culture to do these things. And she is fully accepting of the hate that she gets in response. I mean, she's gotten death threats. She's been told all sorts of things that she's wrong. And she's like, I know that's going to happen. I know that those are the consequences of my curiosity, and I don't care. I mean, I understand more now where they come from, but it has not stopped her from, creating a foundation around curiosity and critical thinking. And I think women like her invite young people, including myself, I still consider myself young, to think a little bit more about what they think is right. And in a space where, especially viewing something like a documentary, where people are alone, there is no threat of anybody accusing them of being wrong. I love documentaries for that, because I can sit by myself in my room and have these critical conversations in my mind of like, like what was the motivation, or what is the thing that draws people to do these either really bad things or what they perceive as really good things. Cults are a great example of that. People searching for answers, falling into these traps that are built by people who also believe they're bullshit, pardon my French, or know that they can control people with that.
I'll quickly add on to two things. One, I think the part of the value in interviewing people you disagree with, and even people whose current lifestyles or beliefs you fundamentally disagree with, or you find offensive, like even if but still the value in asking questions, like you said this documentarian does, is to understand the evolution of that, so that we can help other people to prevent getting into that same path, right? So I think if we can understand how someone got to this point, to a cult or wherever, where it's not good on many levels for themselves and for society, it's hate-based, it's fear-based, it's inaccurate, but to understand how they got there can inform policies and practices that can prevent other people from falling into that trap, right? So like, if we don't understand, we can never fully address something. It goes back to like the policies. We have to, it should be our obligation, if we want to prevent our children from, from believing things that aren't true and joining a cult later that is based in fear and hate, then it is our obligation to understand how people come to join those cults so that we can help them avoid it, right? And the other point I was just going to make, you mentioned the value of a documentary, and I agree. I think different formats beyond just speech and writing, which is what our policymaking process is often limited to. If you think about like testimonies are verbal, legislation is written. Yes, there's hearings, and sometimes Congress has something called field hearings when they go offsite out of DC to visit a place, and that's really powerful. But I think the power of art is, whether it's a documentary or a play or visual art, can be really amazing to influence people. So there's a group in New York City called Theater of the Oppressed, and they work with people who have been oppressed in different situations. So, for example, people who haven't been impacted by the housing crisis, maybe who have been evicted or just have been on the street because they can't find affordable housing. They actually create a play and perform it for members of the public, and key decision makers come, policymakers, and they get to watch a play about their lives that helps them see it through a different lens instead of just them coming to the policymaker's office and telling their story. It's just an art form that gets everyone out of their own space and identity and seeing it as you would a play, right? To really understand. So I think there's so much potential for all of us to be creative in that way. We don't have to do things the traditional boring way, right? We can be creative, and we should be, to use our talents and our interests to share what's important to us and to express ourselves. So, and curiosity gives us that permission, to say, let's imagine a better, more engaging way, right?
Yes. I jump back to one of my motivations and what I do, and that's storytelling. I think this world can be rocked by some storytelling. Setting up environments where that is where people are willing to hear people's stories. But one of my favorite research, and you and I have been really bad about remembering names, but I'll also leave this research done on the power of storytelling in relation to social change. They just point out things like art, using art as an example of creating a space that tells a story and invites a dialogue where nobody has to feel like they are, one-on-one or up against or butting heads, right? And I think for a lot of people, that kind of imagery or that, that delivery of dialogue is so much easier to digest than sitting around a table and making notes. But storytelling, like curiosity, does have to be taught. There is, plenty of people have the way in which they want to tell their story. But it has to be impactful. It has to be in a sense where someone can feel empathy to a certain degree, without disregard of their own experiences. Empathy and altruism. Even through suffering, altruism can be manifested. Actually, even through fear, altruism can be manifested. I think that actually is what glues a lot of these sub-tribalistic groups together. I understand as well there will always be opposition to curiosity for as long as there are people who have maybe a destiny or a path wherein that it's just not part of their experience to evolve in that regard. Fine. Without one opposite, there's never another. Like if there's not problems in the world, we'd both be out of a job. And so, but it's also a motivator for people to again, explore the curiosity. What does that mean about yourself? What can you rediscover if you reconsider the things that you believe and rely upon to just create this vision of who you are? And one more thing I'd like to ask you is with regard to students who are students, whether they're in school or just life students, coming into the human services field, how can curiosity improve how we deliver our services?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think wherever your direct influence is in that process, whether you're working on the program side to implement a program or deliver it, or you're on the design side, or you're on the policy side, it's kind of using curiosity as a foundational principle of, curiosity is a way to just for continuous improvement, right? Think of curiosity as your tool for continuous improvement. Keep asking why not, what if. Right now, and to try to model myself having a curious lifestyle, I'm starting a class in design thinking, because design thinking can help us kind of get outside our boxes of how we think we should be structuring a program or a policy and start asking those what if questions. So using it as a principle, but then like wherever your direct influence is, saying to yourself, okay, this is the parameters I'm working in. Maybe you can't change the budget. Maybe you can't change certain parameters, but is this still the best way to deliver this program? What kind of feedback did we hear from, and who did we not hear from, and how can we best get that feedback? And could we actually even create those curious spaces we were talking about earlier that people feel comfortable sharing their feedback, maybe in a way that we didn't get earlier and doesn't show up as a result? So, and then think of your role and your work in that larger ecosystem of a curious community, is what I would call it. So I think we, like you said, storytelling, I would love, for us to get to a point in our society so that we can all tell our story as full humans and not just, I'm Mary and I'm a policy director, right? Like that limits us so much. So to get to that point, think of our work and ourselves in this larger ecosystem, and you're working on one piece of this human services system, but it is not. It shouldn't just be the responsibility of the human services department or leaders to do it. How else can we build this at the community level? So I've written a little bit about this, but I think if we think about it in terms of quality of life, it's how can we design communities where people feel like they can fully express themselves and authentically be themselves, like they can, that they want to meet new people, that is something that they desire to do, that a community is welcoming in different ways, that they feel like they're heard, that sense of belonging. So don't forget that what you're working on is part of that bigger ecosystem, and it all factors together. And challenge the notion, if you ever hear it, that, well, that's this department working on that. Because I think we need to think bigger. So those would be some places to start. But yeah, I think like it starts inside each of us to kind of reawaken that curiosity. So I would say to any listeners who are feeling kind of stuck in that way, that Casey, that's kind of been my entry into this curiosity work, which is a couple of years ago. Professionally speaking, I was feeling quite stuck. I've been doing the same kind of policy work for a long time and just felt like I wasn't growing, like I wasn't loving what I was doing. And then I took that and I decided to challenge myself and say like, okay, I can't immediately change my work or professional situation, but how else in my life can I keep growing? And so I, deliberately read books that expanded my mindset and thinking, like Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert and Untamed by Glennon Doyle and other books. I gave myself more time for just meditation and just like reflection and journaling. And then I signed up for what I called a joyful challenge. And I would warmly challenge other people to do it too. If you're feeling stuck, there's nothing like challenging yourself to do something that can be great. So in my case, it's training for and completing a marathon, which really took a lot of commitment, but I loved the process. And I think, latching on to a challenge that can help you get unstuck. And then, by the end of those 3 to 4 months, including the marathon training and completing that, I realized that it is totally within my power to get unstuck. We all feel stuck sometimes, but that doesn't have to be your destiny. There's things you can do, and even if you can't change one part of your life. And the bottom line is just keep growing. Like what can you do each day to keep learning, keep growing as a person? What your situation right now doesn't define where you're going to be, even next week, as long as you keep growing. So that was a big lesson for me. And I'm really passionate about helping other people just give themselves that permission and then reawaken their curiosity to keep growing in a lifelong way. I think if we start doing that internally, it's going to naturally show up in our work and then in our broader society. So I do think it's a really internal process that has those benefits, obviously with, key strategies and tools that you can use, but it is a lot of that internal work as well.
That reminds me of two of my favorite cliches, and one of them being, it's not the destination, but it is the journey, which is always reflected in the way we respond to the successes and the failures we have, what we learn from that process. Also, one of my favorite new ones is from a song. It says, Rome wasn't built on a cliche. And it's like, oh, okay. So it might seem like a little counterproductive to the ideas of cliches, but we do reflect on these, little pieces of wisdom because we experience them for ourselves. And I think students, no matter where they are in studying or whether they're in college or they're just, life students, can agree with that too. It's a large part of like discovering who you are, and it's an internal process. And I think we have a lot of steps to take to getting back to reviewing ourselves. It is a weird concept for many because there is so much external dependency on how we define who we are. But that is not helping us. So your options are this. It is staying stuck and being uncomfortable, or it is, proceeding into those uncomfortable and unknowns. I mean, it's one or the other. You either stay stuck and maybe dig yourself into a deeper hole, or it's the other thing. And it's like, to each their own. I value it, and I have a responsibility, I believe myself, in honoring other people's autonomy. But like, for a world that's so nuanced, I feel like that perspective can kind of be argued as like black or white, one or the other. You either stay or you keep going. And I think most people can agree that no matter where they are in their situation, to keep going brings a lot more benefit than staying where they are, as comfortable as it might be. You said something that I love so much, and it's introducing curiosity as a quality of life. We use that term all the time because quality of life is something we want others to build on their own, but we want to also present the resources and the knowledge for that to be possible. And also, curiosity is a principle in human services. It is important that any discipline revisit the foundations of why it exists and what the value system is based on. Everyone has their like, their list of like, what do we value? And especially in human services, it's pretty long. But like, what is to say we just can't go back and like doctor it a little, really focus on like what is missing? Like that research process I was telling you about. Why not? Someone please argue with me, like, why we can't just do a little bit of exploration in order to better achieve what our goals are. Because, it's not like we sit and still use a butter churner to make butter, right? As silly as that might sound, it's like we have now figured out how to make butter a better way. And I think efficiency is not as close to achievement as it is growth. So that's my caveat. Can you tell people where they can find more information about you and the work that you do?
Of course, yeah. So you can check out my website at livecurious.us, and that's livecurious.us. And from that homepage, you can subscribe to my newsletter and make sure to stay up to date on any news as well as inspiration to keep being curious. And then feel free to email me at livecurious2022@gmail.com. And so I do newsletters a couple times a month, and I'm also coming out with an online course later this summer to help people especially people I was describing who might feel a little stuck, to get unstuck through awakening and pursuing their curiosity and having that community of support. So subscribe to my newsletter or message me if you're interested in more information on that. And you can also, there's a tab on my website where it says contact me, and that message will get to me too. And Casey, I'll just add one other quick thing. So I think another important quality of curiosity is vulnerability, right? So it's kind of, and the fancy way to say that is intellectual humility, really kind of knowing what you don't know and being okay with not knowing certain things and admitting to it, right? And I mention that because right now I'm at the start of my entrepreneurial journey. I've only known life as a school district employee, as a teacher, a student, and then a nonprofit employee. And I'm about to go venture off as an entrepreneur, starting this work. And it is scary and it is, comfortable. I'm out of my comfort zone. But I think it's important for us to be vulnerable with each other, because that will help us understand each other better. And I feel totally okay saying there's a lot of things about starting a business I don't yet know well, that I'm learning. And I think what's great about curiosity is it comes from a assets and strengths mindset and place instead of deficit. So instead of saying, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm so behind, I can say I'm learning. I'm learning every day. I'm a student. We're all lifelong students, really. And it's kind of turning that mindset to go from a place of scarcity, like I don't know, and there's so much I don't know, to that asset base, which is I'm learning and I'm excited to learn. So I think if we can instill that that feeling in students starting from a very young age too, like, you should be failing because that means you're trying, and keep learning and growing. Imagine how much freer they'll become as adults to be able to and pursue what they're curious about and not feel bound by what they should do. But it's never too late. We as adults can do that as well. I talk about also using our curiosity as our compass in life, and let achievement follow and success follow. Because when you're pursuing what you're curious about, you're naturally going to succeed because you're invested in it. So I think we sometimes get it backwards. We worry so much about achieving and then reflect and wonder, oh, is this something I'm actually even interested in, versus pursuing what you're curious about. One other caveat I will say, how policy and human services is important in that, is I do feel that our country, with its current policies and its the way we're set up, does not have a strong enough social safety net for people to really freely pursue their curiosity in a way that at any profession you choose, you could do it. So if someone wants to be, let's say, a visual or graphic artist, and they want to live, they should be able to live anywhere in the country, but with the kind of income that they would make, that right now that's kind of impossible, at least to do it comfortably in many places. So I personally feel that our country, especially if we believe in entrepreneurship and we're kind of founded on that spirit of independence, we should strengthen our social safety net to ensure a quality of life for everyone, including, health insurance and affordable housing and income level, so that we can actually back up what we're saying about being able to pursue your curiosity in a way that is equitable. So I guess in that way, I'll probably keep one foot in the advocacy world to keep advocating for that, and encourage and challenge all of us to do that too, to back up what we're saying about, people pursuing their curiosity and their aspirations with the actual policies to ensure that quality of life.
Mary, thank you so much for being part of this and giving back to something that I think anybody watching this is already keen to. And then, hopefully this is something people can take into being curious about their interests, for sure. So I appreciate you being a guest on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Casey, for inviting me and having me on. I had a great time, and look forward to supporting you guys as we go forward.
Many thanks to our guest, Mary Kingston Roche, and don't miss out on her insightful TED Talk available on YouTube. Be sure to grab your spot for our 2023 National Conference happening this November, and find everything NOS on our website, nationalhumanservices.org.